Morning, guys. Welcome to the Tim Moen Show, or afternoon or evening, wherever you are listening to this, whatever time of day it is. Thank you for joining us. I think I've got something special for you today. Now, I came across something called the Sudbury Valley School over a decade ago. My kids were in regular public school and in government school, and they were struggling. My son was getting into trouble, hanging with the wrong crowd, attached to these peers that were just trying to survive in this kind of toxic environment. On the other hand, my daughter was a very diligent student, and she would be stressing out and spending 3 hours a night doing homework, trying to chase these grades that she was so concerned about. They were both suffering in different ways, but for the same reason. And that reason was, I looked at the research behind, or I looked at the history, let's say, of public school, and I was shocked at what I learned about its origins and its purpose and its design. For example, I learned that it was created in Prussia. It was created to create an obedient class of soldiers that would fight and know their class position and be subservient to the state. And it was, well regarded, I guess, by progressive educators in North America who saw that system and said, wow, we could really utilize that system to create an obedient class of workers for the industrial, for our industrial ends, right? So it's pull levers and do factory work and be compliant, obedient kind of robots for us. And, this explains a lot about how public education is designed, right? Learning is all about directing your attention towards an authority figure. It's all about suppressing a child's natural curiosity, their natural impulses and their preferences, saying, no, that doesn't matter. In fact, you must get rid of that and orientate yourself towards the authority figure and rote what that authority figure determines is important for you, and then regurgitate it for a test. And that's how we know that you are doing well and you are learning to be a good, obedient thing. We put you in classes. There's a class above you and a class below you. Be envious of the class above you. Be condescending to the class below you. Know your class position. Bell rings in half an hour. Stop what you're learning, even if you're interested in it. Stand up, march single file to the next classroom. Now you're going to orientate yourself towards another authority figure. All these things were purposely designed to crush individuality, crush the human spirit. And I was shocked and dismayed to learn that. And so when I look at modern education debate today, and it's all about what should be taught in these classrooms, in these brain-crushing, soul-destroying classrooms, no one ever talks about the design of the school itself, about what its purpose is, about what it should be doing. These are our kids, are our most precious resource. What should they be doing? Well, Sudbury Valley School has a very different model, and I'm very pleased to have Mimsy Sadofsky here, who's a staff member at Sudbury Valley School. Mimsy, thank you for coming here and joining me. I really appreciate you taking the time.
It's my pleasure.
Okay, so let's give my audience just a background. What is the philosophy of Sudbury Valley School? How is it different than a regular school?
Well, it's completely, it's like the opposite. The philosophy of Sudbury Valley School is that people learn all the time. That even means you and me. Not me so fast anymore, but yeah, I do still learn. But people learn all the time. Little kids learn with rapidity that is mind-blowing. Babies have to master so much complicated stuff that we don't ever give them credit for. Like, for instance, talking. Learning language from the word go. And, they speak English like it's their native language. Isn't that interesting? Well, and nobody taught them a thing. Right. So we sort of extended that to everything because we realized that that's how people work. And it doesn't mean that you never read a book to find out about things. It doesn't mean that you never ask anybody. It means that your own curiosity is going to take you where you need to go. And we leave children alone. We let them be free so they can go wherever they want to go.
Right. Well, and this tracks well with me. I mean, when my kids were little, they were it was questions a mile a minute, right? And
Mhm.
they're so curious and so into things and wanting to learn, and whatever you're doing, they want to know about that. And they're just thirsty for knowledge and to learn about the world. And that seemed to go away when they enter public school. And it's almost like that curiosity is poo-pooed and thrown by the wayside. I mean, they're medicated sometimes because they can't pay attention in class because they're interested in other things. Their attention is on things that interest them. Well, that's ADHD. We have to medicate that away. So that perfectly tracks with me. Now, Sudbury Valley School. So I found it interesting. I asked you before we came on, what's your title? What's your role? And you said staff member. And I guess you're all kind of staff members there. You're not teachers, you're staff members. What's the deal with that?
We actually have, it's an interesting thing. People, of course, teach because somebody asks you something, you answer. And sometimes it gets into things that sound like teaching, sound like they might happen in a classroom. But usually it isn't stuff that might happen in a classroom. Usually it's more direct than that. But so people do teach, but everybody teaches. Little kids teach, big kids teach. We just don't call it teaching. Someone asked me recently, wrote to me and said, please send us a picture to use for our publication of a child who's playing and learning at the same time. And said, that's what life is, playing and learning at the same time. There is no line between those two things.
Right. They're the same thing.
Yeah. So staff members, they're kind of there to keep the school going, but we actually have one person who's there to teach. She only comes once a week and she's there for 4 hours and she teaches like crazy. She is a potter. She's a professional potter.
Oh.
And she's fantastic and the kids love her. And the activity that she manages to keep track of in that 4-hour period is mind-blowing. She's got usually 8 to 10 people working with her all the time.
Right.
So it's not that teaching doesn't happen. And then they work on it on their own in between. It's that mostly people grow up by absorbing the world around them and pushing further into the areas they're interested in.
Right, right. And so describe to my audience a little bit about Sudbury Valley School. Like there's no classrooms, there's no curriculum. How exactly does it work when my kid shows up, starts the year, starts the day? What does it look like?
Well, the school is, think of it as kind of a slightly shabby, large old house. And the house was originally built for a family and a bunch of servants. So it's not even a house that's all pretty. It's a house with a few pretty rooms and a lot of just plain old rooms, which is fine. And there are small rooms and large rooms and middle-sized rooms. And the rooms are just there. You make them into what you want them to be.
Okay.
So you and your friends bring your computers in and you start playing some kind of game in a room. That room becomes, I don't know, the World of Warcraft. That's not what people play anymore. I know that, but the Minecraft room or something.
Right.
There was about a year when it was Fortnite before people sort of dulled out on Fortnite.
Right, right.
You probably remember Fortnite if you have kids that are.
For sure.
Yeah. But so any room is just a room, and it's just a dull place with tables and chairs, sometimes a sofa if you're lucky. And it becomes alive by the people in it.
Right.
Through the people in it. And it's pretty exciting. You walk down the hall and not everybody is, but people are in rooms talking to each other and pursuing the activities they're interested in. It's a very beautiful atmosphere. And the most beautiful thing about it is everyone treats everyone else with respect. Now, it's sort of a given because that's what the school's about. We respect them and they pay it back.
Right.
But nobody tells them you better pay it back.
Right.
It's just the atmosphere makes that happen.
Yeah. And you even said something that piqued my curiosity before we start. You said you were elected into the role you are. Talk about that. So you're telling me the kids have a vote in who gets to be in what role, or who has a staff member, or how things work around there, or how does that work?
Everything, actually. First of all, There is no tenure.
Okay.
No tenure. I've been there for 50 some years, 52, I guess. And each year I have to be reelected. And
Oh my
believe it
goodness.
or
So
not,
so these kids could fire you if you're not.
believe it or not, it's something you think about every year.
I bet you do. I'll bet you do.
And you think, I probably shouldn't be yelling this week. And that's
Yeah.
sure enough, that's the week you tend to be crankiest.
Right.
But they forgive you for a lot because
Right.
they know that you're holding the school as a space.
Well, that's so interesting. And I suspect, Mimsy, that it really focuses your mind on providing value to these students, right? Or to these
No.
kids. No?
What we're providing is it's people say these words and I never quite know how to define them, but I know that's
Right.
what we're doing. We're providing a space for their development, for their free development. And so it's not, that space is extremely valuable. And people, I think parents value it less than students, really, because to parents, what is this thing? What are you doing? You're not doing anything.
Yeah.
What are we doing for their children? We're not doing anything, but we are. We're
Right.
providing a place that respects them and expects them to figure out who they are and how they should get to be who they are next all the time.
Oh,
So
interesting. And how do you do that? How do you have expectations for them, or how does that get communicated to them? Or like if I'm a student, um, what is motivating me, I guess, to progress and become the adult that I'm destined to be?
What motivates you to do the things you do at home? You can't help
Yeah.
yourself. I
Right.
can't help myself when I right now I'm reading a book about fungi, which I don't know why I'm reading this book, except that somebody I respect very much said that he thought it was a wonderful book. So I'm trying to read it, but I'm thinking, what am I doing reading a book about fungi? I'm very interested in history. This is history at a very different level.
Yeah, no doubt. No doubt.
But you don't stop.
Yeah.
You don't stop. You don't say, "Oh, I'm going to turn into a vegetable now."
Right. Well,
Nobody
and
ever says
isn't
that.
that such a different? It's such a different attitude than someone who kind of came through a public school system where it's like, oh, I can't wait to stop learning. This is like oppressive and driving me nuts. I just want to veg out, think about nothing. Consume Netflix straight into my cerebral cortex and just tune the world out because learning is a terrible thing, and it's like work, right? And what a
I think that's not what they think. I don't think people think about learning. They think about being taught and teaching. I don't
Sure.
actually think people think about learning
That's a good
until
point.
they have the urge to do something on their own.
Right.
And
And
then I want to
yeah.
learn about something.
Right. And it's usually after high school for most of us is when we start thinking about learning. It's like, oh, I can learn whatever I want now that I'm an adult. That's fantastic. And then we charge off into a kind of our careers and actually have some fun with going to some of these
If you're
institutions
lucky.
because
If you're lucky.
if you're lucky, yeah,
Yep.
because now we're learning what we want, right? But
Yeah.
that's interesting. What a interesting juxtaposition too. You equated play and learning as basically the same thing. They're almost synonyms. And yeah,
They are, because play it's not fun unless you're using your head.
right. Yeah. What we do usually at a school is we think of as work, like it's draining. It drains our energy and it stifles us almost, right?
A little boy who interviewed at Sudbury Valley yesterday said he tried public school. He'd been homeschooled, and I don't have much sympathy for homeschooling, but anyway, he'd been homeschooled in sort of a pleasant way. And he said, so he tried public school because there was a gap between him ending what he was doing and being able to come to Sudbury Valley. And he said, my neck was so tired. I said, what? He said, I had to keep watching what the teacher was doing all day and thinking about what she was saying and doing. At the end of the day, my neck and head were so tired.
Wow.
And I thought, oh, if you were here, you might be doing somersaults all day and you'd never bothered to notice you were tired.
Right. That's so interesting. Oh man. Okay.
There is
So
also a lot of outdoors. We have a lot of outdoors. And even though it's Massachusetts, which is not the nicest state for weather in the United States, kids take a lot of advantage of the outdoors.
That's fantastic. Okay, so I dropped my kid off at this school, and there's no curriculum, and my child is 5 or 6, and put my mind at ease. How is my child? How, like, if there's no curriculum, how is he going to learn how to read? Like,
I cannot put your mind at ease. The more you worry, the slower he'll learn how to read.
Right.
And then one day he'll know how.
Right.
And you won't have seen anything happen in between.
Right. So how do kids, like, how does the process usually work? Like, describe to me a child who shows up there, doesn't know how to read, but then one day decides, I guess, he wants to learn to read. How does that happen?
I think that occasionally kids decide that, and sometimes they even ask for help. That is such a rare child, like 1 in a few hundred. And it's much more likely that they keep puzzling things out. Like I watched a little girl with a book about dinosaurs recently, and she knew all the names of the dinosaurs because she knew so much about dinosaurs, and her parents had read to her. You could maybe go the other way when you go around. And her parents had read to her, and she had studied dinosaurs, and she didn't know that she could look at them. She knew she could look at them and figure out their names. She didn't know she could read their names. And then once she realized she could actually read their names and figure out how that Diplodocus or whatever it was spelled, then she realized she could read the description. And it was like something familiar, but she didn't know how to do it. And suddenly she did know how to do it. It was really oddly magical. And you get to see that with kids very often.
Right. So she's equating the words and looking at them and thinking, oh, if I could sound this out or read this, then that would enhance my enjoyment and enhance my play even more. And so how would she then figure out what the letters sound like or what the words say? Would she ask someone or?
No,
I
don't. That's the thing. You don't know. How do they figure it out? Did you know how your kids figured out how to read?
Well, I assume I remember going through public school, and how I learned to read was, phonetics, I guess. How did each, like the teacher spelling it out and have you memorizing things and that sort of thing. But
I don't know. So I'm sure some kids still learn that way, but I don't know how they learn to read. And they learn early, they learn late, they learn in the middle. Parents go nuts if their kid is 8 and hasn't really learned how to really read,
Right.
They think, oh, I've made a terrible choice in schools and they're never going to be able to be anybody. And then that turns out to be somebody that's got a PhD in physics or something at some later moment. There's no rhyme nor reason to it. And we're humble enough to know there's no rhyme nor reason to it.
Wow.
And there may be kids out there that aren't very bright. We haven't seen them. I don't know where they are. Wow. I think kids that are allowed to use their heads are all bright.
Interesting.
I'm not sure. I'm sure there are children with specific physical problems who cannot learn the same way that other people can learn. But I'm not totally sure what they are, unless they're things that you can see. But man, they just all seem so smart. I always say I'm the dumbest kid in school, and I mean it. I mean it in that I think they all take in stuff much more quickly than I do.
What's really coming through to me here, Mimsy, is you talk about you're not there to provide value so much as hold a space for the kids, make sure that space is there, and you're talking about like just trusting and respecting. Like it's almost triggering to me because I want to get in there and I want to make sure. And I remember how I was as a younger parent to my young children, and trying to, it felt like the more I tried to push them to learn a particular thing, or I had my idea about where they should be at and how they should be learning and how they should be developing, the more I pushed that on them, the more it backfired on me. And really maybe even harmed our relationship in a lot of ways. And what I'm getting from you is just the opposite of that. It's just like,
I wish I could say that I was the perfect mother who never did those things.
sure,
But there's always something that you think
of
is so
course, of
important.
course.
You have to
But what I'm loving about what you're kind of telling me now is just like you're not worried about it. You're just trust that that child is going to develop in the way they're going to develop, in the way they're supposed to develop on their own, and you just have to hold a space for them and be there to make sure.
which is the hardest thing. Holding the
Right.
space is the hardest thing. But 54 years of success has taught us something.
Right.
Has taught us it works.
Yeah. And so let's talk about that success a little bit. I mean, you talked about kids going on to get graduate degrees and different things like that. How does that work? If you don't have a curriculum, if you don't have standardized testing and all these things, how does a child graduate from Sudbury Valley School and go on to get a university degree or something like that?
Well, those are two very different things.
Hmm.
Graduation from Sudbury Valley, there's a process, but basically you have to prove to people who understand the school but do not know you, people from other schools, in fact, other similar schools, that you have prepared yourself for what you want to do next, and that you've used the school to do this, and you have to be able to articulate that. And prepare myself for what I want to do next. If all I want to do is, I can't even think, but the people who are examining you and figuring out whether you prepared yourself for what you want to do next do not necessarily think, okay, every child has to go to college, or every child has to be able to get a job, or every child has to want an apprenticeship. But they're interested in those things. Maybe it's every child has to be able to, or lots of children have to be able to travel on their own, which is no small trick, as you know, traveling
Right.
all on your own.
Yeah, for sure.
And lots of our kids tend to do that.
Okay.
But so you have to prove through conversation and through anything you've written, or that's an interesting, excuse me.
That's okay.
Mike. Bad noise. It's funny, you don't realize how noise is.
Yeah, it's not too. I can't hear it. It's pretty quiet, so
I think
it's not distracting to me. If
probably
it's,
sawing something.
Yeah,
he does things.
that's what guys do. We
My
take
husband of 60-some years still does things. Thank God.
He's playing. He's
yeah.
playing with man
He's
things.
Playing. My children say, "Why do you make him live in that house? It's so much work for him." And he says, "I've canceled the people that are going to do the spring cleanup of the yard." And I say, "Why?" He says, "Because I need to do it myself." So
Yeah. Perfect. Okay,
Yeah,
so you're talking about these people that I guess vet the kids or like assess them to see where they're at.
Yes.
Do all of your kids go through that when to graduate? And
in order to graduate, they have to go through that.
Okay.
They don't all succeed. Some fail.
Right.
Some who fail go away mad. Some who fail go away thinking, and some who fail come back and try again the next year.
Right. Okay.
Which is probably the best thing, because I think occasionally kids who are really young and haven't got themselves enough together try to do it. It's so amorphous to say this child isn't ready to graduate. Right. But there are two kids right now that I'm thinking they're not ready that are trying to graduate. They're not ready, and I don't know how to say to them, "You're not ready," because they're not they don't have zero achievements. They don't have zero ambitions. They just have a little less maturity than you might hope for somebody that's going to go out into the world.
Gotcha. Yeah. So
maturity.
So what does that assessment process look like? Do they sit in front of a board of people, or do they present them with artifacts of learning? Or
it's just 3 people, and they might present a portfolio or even music if they have it. If they have artifacts like something they've made, even better.
Right.
That doesn't happen very often,
Right.
but it does happen occasionally. And they talk about who they are and what they've done with themselves and what they want.
Gotcha.
And it's every conversation is different. And the ones that are strangely the ones that are the ones that have least to prove, the kids that have least to prove are the kids that are going to college next, because it's just so easy. You just go to college. Going to college is so easy for a Sudbury Valley kid. They know how to take care of themselves. They know how to be alone. They know
And
all
how
this
do they
stuff.
get into college without, a history of grades, I guess? Because I remember talk. Oh, okay. So they find a college that is willing to talk to them, or
Yes, and right now it happens right this minute that every college is willing to talk to people, because they're only there's a lot of different kinds of colleges that are having trouble with enrollment. I'm kind of surprised at the some years you have kids that you think are the 100 percentile kids in the world, and they only get into some colleges. And this year, everybody gets into basically all colleges. I don't know.
Right. Well, I remember years ago, and I might be misremembering or getting some of the facts wrong, but I remember an interview I saw with someone who went to Sudbury Valley School when they were in grade 9, and when they learned they could do whatever they want, they played, I think, PlayStation the whole year or something like that. And then the next year they started playing guitar or like learning some music, and then they start playing some shows with their buddies around town, and staff members help them kind of organize things like that. Then eventually he decided, well, I better get serious here. I want to go out into the world, and what is it that I want to do? Interested in microbiology. So he made it his goal to go to Harvard to take microbiology, and so he got staff members to assist him in developing a portfolio or something that would get him into Harvard. And then he I think graduated Harvard at top of his class or something like that. And what it stood up to me about that story is that I learned that Sudbury Valley kids on standardized tests, if they take them, do about the same or a little bit better than kids who've gone to public schools. But where they really excel is after school, when they're doing what they choose to do, whether it's being a homemaker or a potter or a university student. They excel at those things. They really excel, for example, in college, if they choose to go there, because they're self-motivated. They don't need, they haven't been motivated by the crack of the whip or, carrots and sticks. It's been that intrinsic playfulness that has been directing them and motivating them. Has that been your experience, or
Well, I don't know where this person who graduated at the top of his class from Harvard is, because I've heard of no such person.
Oh, okay.
But just sort of as yes, you're right. It's a very good description. However, just to go back to Harvard for a second, Harvard has something called an extension school, which most universities have, most four-year universities have. And anybody basically can go to that, can take courses there. And those courses add up to credits at Harvard.
Right.
That's all I want to say about that. It's nothing to do with getting into Harvard,
Gotcha.
Which kids, to my knowledge, never actually, I don't know of anyone who's applied to Harvard from Sudbury Valley in all these years, which doesn't mean they haven't.
Well, let me ask you this.
But there are plenty of other universities.
Yeah, Sudbury Valley School, as I understand it, started in one place, but there's many Sudbury Valley schools across North America and the world even. Is that correct?
Many's a big word.
Wow.
What do you, give me many. Give me
I don't know. I guess half a dozen or more.
Oh, more, yes.
Yeah,
more.
Yeah. So
certainly more in this, more very healthy, lengthy-lived ones in this country.
I guess what I'm getting at is that, the name implies that it's in this one valley in one particular place, but it's actually not just a geographical place. It's an actual model of school that others can take and replicate and bring other places. How would one, if someone were interested in this type of educational experience for their child, this kind of environment or space for their child, where, and they don't live near Sudbury Valley or Massachusetts, what would your advice be to them?
Move.
Move?
Not move necessarily to Boston, but move to one of the healthy Sudbury schools.
Okay. And could you
I'm
name?
totally serious.
Yeah.
Starting a school is so much harder than anybody thinks it will be. Everything
Right.
that you're doing when you start a school is countercultural, even after all these years. And you're fighting the tide all the time. And you're fighting most people. And people who say, this is wonderful, I want my kids to be free, I want to do this, when they actually see what free looks like, say, oh no. And that's goes on all the time. So you need people to work with to do it. The people that you need to work with disappear. I mean, it's just an awful thing to start a school. I don't know how anybody does it, but those people that have done it deserve kudos big
Right.
time. And you should go be with their school, not even think about doing it yourself, especially today where most people have ways of working from home.
Yeah. Are any of these schools boarding schools at all, or?
Not really. They're not really. There's a boarding school in West Virginia, but it's very small, and I
Right.
don't know how exactly it's like this model. It's enough like this model for sure. And they have some boarding, but they don't take kids above a certain age because they don't want to. They don't want the problems associated with cleaning up other people's problems, I guess.
Right,
I don't know.
right.
I shouldn't say that because I don't
Wow.
know why I don't take people above a certain age, but they want a kid who goes there to be able to be comfortable there and be kind of one of a small group.
Right. So
It's never a big group, and none of these schools are big.
Right. Right. Are there any in Canada that you're aware of, or?
No, but that doesn't mean anything just because I'm not aware of them.
Right.
The Windsor House, which I think I wrote you about at one time, which was not like Sudbury Valley, but was a lot like Sudbury Valley, I think stopped existing a few years ago, or maybe had to change its face. It was a publicly funded school,
right.
A lovely school in North Vancouver, which is a very beautiful place.
Yeah, it is very beautiful. Yeah.
And there were a few other schools. There was one in Toronto.
Right.
But
well, one of the problems with starting a school, and I mean even just homeschooling in Canada, is that you have to report to the provincial authorities what your curriculum is, and so of course that kind of flies in the face of philosophy like Sudbury Valley School, where there is no curriculum. So you would probably have to get fairly creative about.
Well, you do have to get creative, but in Canada, are all the provinces the same in that way?
That I'm not sure. I know in my province of Alberta, when I was looking into it, there were requirements to report your curriculum to Alberta Education. So, that makes it a little bit tricky to.
Well, there's ways to. I'm not talking about lying. I'm talking about discussing the possibilities for kids to do things that authorities can often say is a curriculum if they want to, and if they understand that people do have the possibilities of learning anything they want to learn, as opposed to the public school, or not as opposed to, as in the public school, where they also have those possibilities and don't necessarily learn them. Everybody knows that.
Yeah, I suppose you could develop kind of a learning portfolio of what, just evidence of what your child is learning and present that to the authorities.
You could do that. I think in a lot of places, homeschoolers have to do that. That's really unpleasant.
Yeah, I bet.
Because how do you know what's going on in anybody else's head? You just don't. So it requires a certain amount of testing or quizzing and.
Right. And you said you weren't very sympathetic to homeschooling. What is kind of your issues with homeschooling, or what should people watch out for if they're looking at that route?
Well, um, this is personal, but I know I'm not the only person that feels that way.
Right.
When you homeschool your children, when you have children, you have a tremendous amount of influence over those babies and little kids,
Hmm.
as long as you've got hold of them. Then you send them to school at sort of the age when they're ready for society to have more influence, like 5 or 6, they're ready for more than the family. And I think homeschooling often tucks them back into
Mm,
the family at an age when they're ready to be part of the world. And
right.
it is not necessarily good for kids. I've
Right.
seen a lot of homeschool kids who, for instance, can't really answer questions. They can answer questions about the things they've studied, but if you ask them about what they like or who they are, they look to their parents for answers.
Yeah. Interesting.
Even
Okay.
teenagers, it's not pretty.
Right.
So I think it robs kids of their social of,
Right.
of needs that they have for socialization that are really big needs.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I guess, if you're a parent who's worried about the type of socialization they might get in, say, a public school, which isn't very good either, it's kind of socialization that you might get in a penitentiary or something like that. Not necessarily the best
Oh,
kind of
not
socialization.
always, not
Not
always.
always, no, sure, but I mean, a lot of people who are concerned about public school are concerned about the type of socialization they get. What I'm picking up here is that if you are going to do an alternative type of education, whether it's a private school, a Sudbury Valley School, or even a homeschool, one thing you want to make sure is that you get plenty of socialization for that child with their peers, where they have some autonomy and independence, making relationships away from parents and kind of on their own.
Yeah,
That
that's
seems like
very
an
hard to
important point.
do.
Yeah.
Usually those relationships are relationships that people have had to figure out, like, oh, I'm going to go to a dance class because I like to dance, and that gives me, it gives you an hour, maybe twice a week or something. It's not the same as being with other kids a lot.
Right.
So it's really artificial, and those are the things I have against it. A lot of people have no choice but to do that kind of thing.
Yeah.
They don't want their children to be in public school for one reason or another,
Right.
and so they do the best they can. And
Well,
I'm not.
one of the thing I really like about the socialization that I've read about that happens at Sudbury Valley School is that you've got a mixing of ages, right? So you've got young kids learning from older kids, and that seems to engender respect both ways. In that it gives an older kid a chance to be maybe a bit of a mentor or a leader, and it gives a younger kid someone to have a relationship that they can look up to and that they can try to emulate or learn from. And does that strike you as something that you notice? I know, that's one of my issues
All the
with.
time,
Yeah.
all the time. And the other thing that we notice is that teens seem to be, almost all teens seem to be just, they just want to be kind to young kids. They just
Right.
want to help young kids. So that's a very beautiful thing too. But the friends that kids make at Sudbury Valley are friends for life often,
I bet.
and that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. And, you contrast that to what you often see in some of these public schools, something that my kids experience. I certainly experience, and you see a lot of bullying and, negative emotion and people and kids lashing out at each other. And it seems to be, the exact opposite in Sudbury Valley School. And I suspect that has to do with the fact that the DNA is from the ground up is different. It's built on, like you say, respect, that kind of
Because
democratic
everybody doesn't enter the school equal. A lot of
right.
people enter the school having problems in themselves that they need to solve, and not everyone comes wonderfully respectful.
Right. Of course. Okay.
Sometimes it takes a month or a year or something to get them to chill and realize that it's okay. But I've been watching it. There's a boy in school now who's had not a rough year in that he's been suspended. He's never done anything wrong enough to get suspended. So, but he's just really harsh on the edges. And yet he'll do anything for a 5 or 6 year old, anything.
Right.
I mean, it's like a totally different him emerges when a young kid needs him.
Interesting. Yeah. And
Yeah.
that's something
So
that you wouldn't necessarily get in a
a
public school.
chance
Like,
that you wouldn't necessarily have a
right.
chance.
Yeah.
But
And
you
that
might have
ability,
a family.
and you think about how great that is for that, troubled young man's psyche to be able to be a mentor and have a young kid look up to him and be able to teach something, that's it's almost a human need to be able to provide that for another human. To be helpful to another human is a human need, right? And so, the opportunity for this young man to be helpful to a younger child, that's fantastic. Uh, you talk about how some of these kids, of course, don't come there. A lot of them may come from troubled homes, or just different personalities, and they arrive at this school, and that same child arrives to a public school. The antisocial issues that they might have arrived with might get worse, and they might act up in different ways. What happens to these kids in a Sudbury Valley school? Can you maybe articulate how they become healthier, I guess, or more pro-social over time? You said that, it might take a month, but it might take a year. What do you see that's happening in Sudbury Valley that kind of makes children more pro-social?
It's if I tell you, it'll sound dumb.
Well,
because it's sort of dumb. I think that being surrounded by people who accept you and are wanting to like you is very powerful. Very, very powerful. It's always seemed very odd to me that kids who were, and we don't get many troubled kids anymore, but kids who were troubled in other situations would come to us, and they would just be nice. And I thought, how does this happen? And I didn't know. I don't know. I'm
Right.
talking about teenagers. I don't know, but it's the only thing I can think of is that the other kids, the other teenagers in the school, and maybe the adults, certainly the younger kids, just make it hard not to be relatively comfortable.
Right. Mimsy, can you talk a little bit? I don't want to take up too much more of your time, but there's just so many questions I have. Can you talk a little bit about the democratic process, how your school works? I understand kids can kind of vote on staff members, that your job is kind of up for grabs every year, and you have to win their hearts and minds and say, hey, I'd love to hold a space for you again this year, kids. What about rules?
That'd be a nice way to say it.
Yeah.
I don't think they quite think of it that way, but well, the school itself is a pure democracy, one person, one vote. So the only people who have any power in the school are students and staff. No one else at all has a vote in anything or power over the school, except, maybe the town could come and say, we don't want you to let your kids go into Callahan State Park anymore, which they probably couldn't say, but they might be things they could say.
Right.
The town could make certain strictures. The state could make certain strictures. They haven't on us ever, thank goodness. But now I forgot what I was talking about. I was
talking about the democratic process and how everyone has one vote.
Yeah. So it's sort of interesting because people who are very happy with the way things are going don't often use their vote. Often don't use their vote. I said it the wrong way. But there are things within the major institutional framework besides electing staff. All the rules are formed through the school meeting, which is the body that elects staff and does a lot of other things, and all of the budget and really everything. And there's a judicial committee, two words that are very hard for me to say together one after another. We call it the JC in school. It's much easier. And that takes care of the disciplinary things. So if you have a problem with something that's going on, you make a written complaint, and the JC which is composed of kids, will examine it and decide what they think happened, write a report, may accuse someone of having broken a rule.
So these kids are being judged by a jury of their peers, basically.
A jury of their peers. Thank you for those words. Yeah. Yes. It's very hard for people to believe that.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I love it.
sometimes it's so interesting because right now the people on the JC are picked by lot, and the chairman of the school meeting, who's also the president of the corporation that the school is always a student, and she picks a new JC every month. And there's always one older teenager, one young kid, and a couple of people in the middle. And there's this little 8-year-old boy. And when something has happened, they're not big things, there's something got spilled in the playroom. These are the kinds of things we're talking about. When something has happened that you think, we'll never figure out who did that. That's ridiculous. Why is anybody bothering to make a complaint? He'll pipe up and he'll say, oh, I was there. That was Danny. And it was Sophia. And she poured water on Danny's lunchbox. And then she dared Danny to sit in the water that dripped on the chair. And Danny did. And then Danny said she wet her pants. But she didn't really wet her pants. But she had to change her clothes.
Oh, man. Oh,
I guess what you tell a staff member is not, I sat in a puddle on a dare. When you're 6 years old, you say, I wet my pants.
Right.
And they're going to be so nice to you.
Jeez. That is too funny. Man,
It was funny.
We better not let Hollywood get any ideas here, because this would make great reality TV. People would be endlessly entertained by the Judicial Committee and what's going on, what kind of complaints are being brought up.
So interesting. I can sit in there every day, but I can't keep my mouth shut.
Right.
That's the trouble with me. I always want to say, but did this happen? Did that happen?
So in this, you kind of describe this student body or governmental body of the school that votes on all budget, important things like rules and staff members. Is there a lot of debate that goes on in these things? Is it, how does that whole thing work? Do kids show up there and argue different sides of issues, or?
Something big can happen, or that seems big to me, and it's poorly attended. And the other day, something that I thought was ridiculous happened, and there were more than half the school was in there, just sitting there quietly through a long debate, waiting to vote. This is what it was. Sometimes there are kids who get a concession, which means the school meeting grants them the use of a room to sell snacks in for like half an hour a day. Now, concessions, as you can imagine, are very desirable to children because they can use their money, they can use their choice, they can get things to eat that their parents would die if they saw them eating, stuff like that. And so the concession is a very interesting thing. But there were two, the last people that had a concession had it for 5 months, and they did a really bang up job. And I thought, okay, it's April, enough already. We're done this year. But no, there were two teams of people who wanted to do it themselves for the rest of the school year. And there was a huge debate about it. It was endless.
Wow.
It really was over an hour.
Interesting. But that sounds fantastic. Mimsy, I don't want to take up any more of your time. We're coming up on close to an hour. Where can people learn more about Sudbury Valley School and the model and
office at sudburyvalley.org.
Office at sudburyvalley.org.
No, I'm sorry. Sudbury Valley. I'm sorry. That's our email address. Sudburyvalley.org.
Sudburyvalley.org. Awesome. Okay. Well, I'll put that link down in the show notes.
Really simple.
Yes.
Or
Mimsy
Valley School. Anything. Anything close to it, and you'll get there.
Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you. I know we've been trying to make this happen for a while. You're a busy lady.
We have.
Yeah. So I really appreciate you holding a space for me today and my audience.
Well, it's my vacation, so it was easy, but I had COVID twice. In my own defense, I had COVID twice this winter.
Wow. Fair enough.
So, there were blank periods.
That'll knock anyone on their butt. So awesome. Thanks so much, Mimsy. Appreciate it.
It was a pleasure. Thank you very much.